are not the last of our free webinars on behalf of the Engineering Skillnet. We registered over 800 learners this year and hopefully even more next year, but it's the first of a series on what we think is a very important topic, which is coaching. And why do we think coaching is an important topic? I'll just lead you through the opening slides and then I'll welcome our three speakers for today. And, we're in a great, I think, position to be able to learn from very established coaches. Each of these coaches is bringing a slightly different tool or model to the table for us today. We'll discuss those one-to-one, myself to that person, and they'll present individually, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So quick reminder of what the Engineering Skillnet is about. Obviously, we want technically more proficient, certified professionally and cross-skilled staff. And we also, want to be able to support staff from the point of view of furthering their careers, because careers are changing shape at the moment. So what represents a skills pathway today is quite different even to 2 years ago. Lots of new opportunities popping up. Talent, and I suppose developing talent, is probably our most powerful tool to transform our businesses, because data doesn't make decisions on its own. We need people to do that, and we need people to make responsible, accountable decisions. And to improve our businesses, really continuous improvement is the heart and soul of Lean, and it's also the heart and soul of coaching. We have a growth mindset, we would hope, in that we don't see anyone as fixed. We see people as all potential talent, not just top talent and other people, but everyone is potential talent. Because in this very interrelated, complex world that we have today, all the systems interrelate in slightly different ways, and it means, we need lots of diverse views on those systems, people not afraid to ask questions, and really anyone capable of coming up with a good idea. So we need new ideas and we need creativity, and coaching, collaboration and creativity go very well together. And we also want to prepare our workforces for the future. It's really hard to predict where technology is going to take us, and it's doing so very, very quickly. But what we definitely know is that if we invest in people's character, that is going to support our businesses very well. Because at the end of the day, as I said, we want responsible decisions, and we want to empower everybody in engineering industries to make responsible decisions, because we're moving really from an era of mass industrialization much more to mass customization. So just a few bits of news from the world of ASAN, and this is a global report. I'll go back, apologies. Good and bad news, I suppose. Globally, we see 7 in 10 knowledge workers experiencing burnout or feeling like imposters in the last year. We also find that people are really struggling to get the quality of information that they want, even though we often have a tsunami of data and coming at us, and plenty of data within organizations. But certainly what's been found to be the case is that people are much more unsure and uncertain around complexity when they work in what they describe as a collaborative organization. So we want to equip our businesses of the future and our people of the future to be resilient and not to be afraid of complexity and uncertainty, because it is very much part of our world of work. I don't know a lot about AI, but I'm learning. But what I do know about AI is why human intelligence is still better than artificial intelligence. And that's because we have 3 secret weapons, 3 killer apps of human intelligence if we choose to apply them well. And each of our speakers is going to address one of those today. First of all, we can generate new questions. And within the coaching world, there's a model called TGROW, which Owen from ARV is going to explain to us and unpack a little bit. Computers, yes, can out-debate humans now. Project Watson, thanks to IBM, has a computer system, a natural language system that can out-debate human beings when it comes to points of information, but it can't out-persuade us. And how we persuade one another and why individual biases that are more or less cancelled out collectively is because of good dialogue. And dialogue is around achieving a flow of meaning. It's different to debate or discussion. And this flow of meaning is also important within a tool that is applied commonly in coaching, that SCARF model. And John McNamara is going to explain that to us today. And hopefully we can take some of that learning from John. And then finally, computers can't reflect on themselves. They're not self-referential like we are. So this ability to pause, to take a minute, not to be afraid of silence, even in meetings, and taking the opportunity to reflect. These are the 3 killer apps of human intelligence. And I feel coaching is a really good way of unlocking those and of making the space for those 3 important cognitive processes that still keep human intelligence ahead of artificial intelligence. So if we could start with you, Owen, and you might help us out here with understanding, this model, the TGO model, and I know you're going to lead up to that, but can you talk us through that? Because I think it's a really useful tool for organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. And just to say thanks a million for having me. It's lovely to be here today. And yeah, I suppose the pitch was around culture, instilling a coaching culture. So just as a lead up to TGROW, I thought it might be useful to connect the culture with the strategy. And leaders establish the strategy in an organization, and are responsible, I suppose, for the overall direction of the business. And so if you cycle through there, we know that people then can be, if we link people's development, if you want to click through a little bit, Fiona.
Sure, sorry.
People then are developed by coaching the improvement in the direction of the strategy or the challenge that the business is experiencing. And we, in the context of a vision, we kind of grasp the current condition, and then we move towards the next target condition. And as we do that, we encounter obstacles. And this is the way in which we execute the strategy of the business. And this model then links the execution of the of that to the actual strategy itself. And so what we can see there is we've got this current condition, the target condition. We want to move towards the target condition, and inevitably we encounter obstacles. And these obstacles then provide the opportunity for coaching and for improvement. Now, in the normal scheme of things, we sometimes, I suppose, our interaction isn't always perfect. And there's a bit of the next slide there, we might see that there's a bit of a villain in the room sometimes when we're trying to lead a team. And that can be kind of manifest itself in what we'd like to call maybe the blame game, which is a place that sometimes people go when they're struggling to take ownership and demonstrate the kind of attributes which will help us to move towards the target condition. And there's a couple of examples of what I mean by the blame game there, Fiona, on the next slide. The first one, when we kind of, perhaps kind of ignore or deny kind of the situation, what's going on at the moment, a very human characteristic, something that in the face of challenging obstacles we can do. Or the next one, Fiona, if you go through this particular aspect of the blame game is when we maybe think that something isn't perhaps our job, and we circumvent whatever obstacle it is to the detriment of everybody. But the opposite to that is this idea of what we might call wholesome accountability, Fiona. And wholesome accountability.
Apologies, I think I'm missing a slide on your behalf there, on my fault.
That's okay.
But if you want to explain the concept to us, that'd be great.
Yeah, because ultimately that's what we're doing when we're coaching. We're building awareness around things about the blame game, for example, and then we're helping people to take responsibility for achieving the outcomes. We're helping them to, in the context of the vision and strategy, in the context of their objectives and key results, we're helping them to understand the current state, the particular goals that they have, and then to achieve them, to take responsibility for achieving them, and to be accountable for them. And wholesome accountability is when we allow ourselves to, what you called character, Fiona, to rise above our circumstances and take the action necessary for achieving results, to see it, to own it, to solve and do. So it's this wholesome accountability, it's this attitude, if you like, that we as leaders or leaders within an organization can do well to coach. And an approach to coaching that is the TGROW model. So the TGROW model then, it starts with the T, where you establish the issue or the topic that you want to discuss. And in a lean context, when you're moving from a current state to a future state and you encounter those obstacles, that provides ample opportunity for developing a person in the direction of the challenge of the business. So then you want to say, well, what is it? What do you want to achieve? You want to ask the question, what do you want to achieve? Why is it that you're not achieving what you really want to achieve? And then listen to understand the reality of where are you now. Identify then what you can control, what options do you have, and then help to facilitate the solve it question without taking ownership of their issues fully, but helping them through listening and questioning to facilitate how they can, take the action needed to get results. And then finally, to help them to demonstrate, to test for movement, to help them to demonstrate will by asking questions like, what else can you do? Or what will you do now? And that then, by asking these questions, and then Fiona, by helping people to kind of feel understood by crucially listening, you can help people to move towards the target condition from the current state through the obstacles and to the target condition in pursuit of the strategic objectives of the organization. And if you just want to click through the last couple of pieces there, Fiona. The fundamental, after you've asked the question, and I think the other speakers in the room are going to go into this in a bit more detail, the key response is to listen. To listen. And I think I might just leave it there, Fiona.
Listening, much easier said than done. Oh, now maybe more so for myself personally. It's been one of the most important skills I've had to develop over the years. But, I think it's powerful that you're highlighting there. Here's some questions. Start asking questions as opposed to telling people maybe what they want to do or what they want to develop skills wise. But it's also surprising, isn't it, at times that, there are some of our best performing people, they often are suffering from imposter syndrome. They are unsure of themselves because we've less face-to-face contact and maybe less opportunity to give people feedback. And we make this point in a webinar that we're going to repeat next year on talent retention, that whether we know it or not, really, everybody's asking themselves three questions. Am I good enough is one. Do I belong here is the second. And the third is, am I able for the next challenge that's ahead of me? Because there's a lot of unknowns out there at the moment, and it's hard to see what's coming next. But Mike, you might help us then, from the point of view, how can we create the type of conversations that will really help us then, to encourage people to arrive at shared insights and not be waiting to be told what to do or be tempted to just tell people what to do either. John, could you help us through that? Just what are the type of conversations we should be aiming for?
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue in, because it's about the conversations we have and the quality of conversations that we have. And these are determined by our ability to listen, which sets the scene in this. And I suppose just from a wider perspective, I looked a couple of years ago at the professional skills I would need to be good at what I do. And the lens with which I looked through was, what is the stuff in the workplace that people are getting progressively worse at? And listening was one of them. And I said, people's ability to focus and be attentive is diminishing. So if I can get really, really good at this, this is something that's going to make me stand out, because people are going to be naturally drawn towards me more because they're like, oh, this guy actually listens. When you sit down and when you're present with him, now it's my job now as a coach to do this, but it is something that is becoming more rare. So I think from a professional standpoint for the people on the call, if you're looking at next year in areas for development, then listening for me is an obvious one, because it's like, okay, if everyone else is getting worse and I can get better, this makes me stand out. So that's kind of a segue into listening occurs at three different levels. And it's developing the ability to cycle between the levels and be able to go into the different levels depending on what's required in the conversation. So I'm just going to talk us through the three levels. I think we'll do the questions at the end, Fiona, will we? Or they can pop them in the chat box.
Yeah, absolutely. So people feel free, put up in the chat box who your question is for, say if it's for Owen, for John, or for Mike later, and then we'll get back to as many of them as we possibly can.
Yeah, so we'll do them all at the end. So I'll talk through it and try to provide some context. And as I said, if you have questions specifically on any of the parts, I'll come to them at the end. So level one is internal listening. The focus on level one is all about me. What's in this for me? What do I have to do here? And it's very much about listening to just respond or move somebody along. Or, oh, I have the solution and I'm going to jump in and give it to you so that I can get on to the next thing. Or, oh, I've seen a situation like this before. Do this, this, and this and go away. And it's a very fast exchange, which is focused on me, and it's not focused on the individual. Now, at level 1, all of the listening occurs with our ears. So we're just listening to the words and nothing else. And this is a lot more present in the workplace and in social interactions than it should be. But I think we know when we experience this, it's like they're nodding and smiling, but I can see that they're not really registering what I'm saying. So the second level is focused listening. And this is the next progression where we listen with our ears, but we also listen with our eyes. So Fiona might be saying something to me and the words say this, but I'm observing and I'm going, she's saying this, but her body is telling me something completely different. And that's a prompt for me to open the dialogue and say, I'm getting a sense that this doesn't add up. Or I'm observing that you're saying this, but your body is telling me this. Am I missing something here? So it's a deeper level of listening, and we're more engaged with the person. And the focus goes from me to you. So whether that's one person or a collective group of individuals, my focus then goes across to them, and I start to get more connection and more collaboration. And we have a deeper level of dialogue and conversation. I'm bringing more curiosity to understand more, and people can feel that I'm present in the situation. So the third level, which we refer to as global listening. So I'm listening with my ears for the words. I'm using my eyes to pick up the body language cues. And then the third piece is I'm also listening with my gut. So this is the intuition piece, or the invisible that's happening in a conversation that you're picking up on. Now, I'm sure you've all been in conversations or meetings where on the surface, everything looked great, but your gut was saying, there's something amiss here. I can't quite put my finger on it. But when I'm fully attuned, I can pick up on these extra pieces that are happening in the environment. And what we can do in this space is, if we're not quite sure, is just merely say, I'm getting a sense that we're missing something here, or my gut is telling me that we're missing something, or there's something else. And you just throw it out there, and that can open up the dialogue even further, because that can bring stuff that's being unsaid to the surface, or just get you to reflect and acknowledge a little bit deeper as to what's going on here. So there are 3 levels of listening. Michael is going to develop this a little bit further in his piece to kind of tell us what we can do around here. But I've just a couple of questions to pose on the 3 levels that may be worth considering for you. So where and when in your role do you require being in level 3 listening? Now, this won't be every minute of every day because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus. But if you look at your week or look at your month and say, okay, this meeting here or this interaction here or this point of the project, that's where I need to be able to access global listening, because it's really important and I need to take in all of the information. And that in itself is a skill to be able to go from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. And when we get distracted and go to level 1, being able to pull yourself back in again. So I think just within your environment, it's bringing awareness as to when you need to be able to access level 3 listening, and how you go about doing this is really important. And then just the self-awareness piece is just tuning into how you are in your interactions with your team. Do you go to that place of interrupting or coming up with the solution straight away or jumping in, or can you sit and be curious and open the dialogue? So I think that self-management piece is really critical to cascading through the levels here. So that's the listening piece. And as I said, Michael will develop this on practically a little bit further in his piece. So we'll just move on to the next slide. So this is the kind of main crux of what I'm referring to in my piece. This is from a guy called David Rock, who's a neuroscientist. And in 2005, he produced this model, which fits into a lovely acronym, as most models do. And it's called the SCARF model. And And Rock was curious around what was happening in our social environments and what kind of an environment could we create to enable dialogue and collaboration and connection. So he did a lot of research around this, and he looked at all of the different areas. And I suppose he landed on 2 binary points first. So we're either in a threat space or we're in a reward space. And in a threat space, we feel danger. So we pull back and we preserve. So this goes back to historic times of when the threat was physical danger and fear for our life. But on a neurochemical level, this is the same response we get to perceived danger or danger in the workplace. Reward, on the other hand, is what we need for collaboration. So this is when we lean in. We feel safe, we feel heard. Fiona said a while ago, we feel like we have this sense of belonging. And when we feel that, then we move toward. So we engage in the conversation, we feel safe. So Rock did a lot of research, and he boiled it down to basically 5 areas. And he said, if these 5 are present in your social environment and in your conversations, people will feel safe and they will engage and open up and collaborate more. If, however, they feel threatened at any of these 5 levels, they're going to disconnect and they're not going to engage and they're not going to collaborate. So whether that's on a one-to-one or in a team environment. So I'll just walk you through the 5, and then I can just explain the threat reward a little bit further in this. So the first of these is status. So status basically is when we go into a one-to-one or a group space, we're looking to see where we sit in the pecking order. Or what is the pecking order here? What's our social position in this group? And if there's what's called a power gradient, which is the level of power between me and the other person, if this gradient is too steep and I feel like, oh, this person is really, really important and I'm not, that signals danger, and then I will pull back because it's that sense of, okay, what's my sense of value in this space? So status is first and foremost. And if there's a misalignment in status here, this is where people can disconnect very fast because it has big connections to our ego. And the neuroscience, when they've done the research on this, said the same part of the brain fires when there's a status mismatch as to when physical pain actually manifests in the body. So it's that severe in the human physiology. So the second is C, which is for certainty. And I think you all work in what might be described as complex or uncertain and fast environments. And people are scanning their environment looking for some level of certainty just to put themselves at ease. And whether it's in a change project or a project that's coming to conclusion or commencement, usually you can give people certainty to a point. And that's through your conversations and that's through dialogue. If they're in a situation where they feel like they don't have any certainty, then basically their level of safeness diminishes, and that's where the imposter syndrome can present. That's where fear can present. That's where the sense of uncertainty presents, and it brings a lot of stress. So they're seeking certainty in some way, shape, or form. The third is autonomy. And autonomy is an interesting one because autonomy came with COVID, whether managers or people wanted it or not. And the micromanagers found COVID very, very difficult because they had to give people autonomy because they couldn't sit and watch them anymore. And people want autonomy, is my experience. And I've been coaching people for 14 years. One of my key observations is people want autonomy. My other observation is people are not very good with it. So you can't just go, here you go, fill your boots, and you're on your own. So there is a level of support that needs to be given with autonomy. And I suppose the question that your people are asking here around autonomy is, does my manager fully trust me to complete this task on my own with the agency? And if they think, no, they don't trust me at all, then that becomes an issue and they move towards the threat space. So it's like, I'm not fully trusted. I'm not given autonomy. I'm being micromanaged. So I'm moving to threat space, and then I'm going to close down and I'm not going to collaborate and engage. Relatedness then is the fourth one. So we're scanning our environments for some form of connection and belonging. Can I relate to the other people in this environment? And Fiona mentioned this already, and belonging is a huge piece here. So if you go into a team or you go into a one-to-one and you feel like, I don't belong here, I don't feel like I have value, I don't feel like I can connect with other people, then you're going to shut down. Then you don't engage and you move to the threat space. If you feel like you're of value and you belong, you're going to open up, you're going to be more approachable, collaborative, and curious. And that leads to way better conversations and way better outcomes. The last one we're looking for is fairness. And this is one that shows up a lot in the workplace. Sometimes it's perception, sometimes it's reality. Am I being treated equally here? Am I being treated the same as everyone else? Am I being afforded the same opportunities as the other people in this team or in this organization or on this project? And if people feel like, yeah, this is equitable for everyone, they will engage. If they feel, whether it's perception or reality, that they're not, they're going to disengage and they're going to move away. So I think from your perspective, the value in this is, there's a couple of pieces here that can be of value. The first is looking at this through the prism of, if issues present and you're going, okay, there's a friction point here in this team. At what level do you believe it's appearing at? Okay, maybe they don't have enough certainty. That's where I fix the problem. Or maybe I'm micromanaging too much and I need to give them some more autonomy. That's going to be a solution here. Or maybe I need to make them feel welcome a little bit more. Or maybe I'm too egotistical and I'm all about my status and I'm diminishing them, so they're fearful of doing anything or making decisions. So I think it's a very useful check-in point for us, but also to scan the environment and make sure, if I can get the 5 of these in play, we should have very good dialogue and engagement. So we'll just move on to the next slide, because this is kind of an add-on to this. So we're saying the threat and reward space. The reward space is engaged. You've got engaged people. So when a reward is detected, it triggers an automated neural engaged response that pulls us towards the reward. And the reward can be a conversation, it can be a dialogue, or it can be an outcome. The opposite is true. When we feel threatened, we will disengage. So for you, I think it's important to just reflect and say, in my meetings, in my one-to-one conversations, in these coaching moments, what kind of an environment is present? Is it encouraging threat or encouraging reward? And for some leaders, it's a threat space. How do I manage to move this to reward? Or also what can happen is individuals can present in threat state. So they show up, they're flustered, they're panicky, they feel under pressure, they feel uncertain. And you're going, okay, how can I just move this individual in this conversation more towards reward? And that's a slow process of engagement, and listening, and some of the stuff Michael will talk about will show you how you can move somebody from threat to reward to open up the conversation. So I'll just move on to the last slide and then I'll pass it on to Michael. So slow is smooth, smooth is fast. We're going to come to these at the end, I think, Fiona. We are our individual kind of taglines.
Yeah, we'll do a catch-all at the end, definitely, John.
Yeah, so the mind the gap piece is basically the gap that exists between where the individual is at and where you're at on each of the 5. And if you feel, for example, okay, I've looked at this scenario, I'm not quite getting there with this individual or this team, which of the 5 of SCARF has the biggest gap? It might be a trust gap. It might be a certainty gap. It might be a status gap. How do I bridge the gap with these individuals to create better dialogue and engagement? And I think in all scenarios, if you do some deep reflection or seek feedback, it'll become quite apparent where the gap is. And then that gives you something to work on. Just on to the last one, because this is the segue into Michael's piece. One of the questions that gets posed to us quite a bit, and I'm sure Michael and Owen can reaffirm this, is coaching is great, but where do I do it and when, and how can I find a time? And there's probably 3 different ways to have coaching moments or coaching conversations or really get into level 3 listening. The first one is what we call online. So this is an organized conversation. It can be a 30 at 30, it can be a performance review, it can be a meeting you put in where you say, okay, we've 45 minutes, we're going to sit down and discuss a specific area or area of development. So that's online. Offline is basically the opportunistic moments that present. So you're on the work floor or you're in the office and something comes up and it's an opportunity. You go, okay, I can coach around this. We can develop some learning and reflection based on this point. And then the last one is retrospective. So let's say you're in the middle of a project. There's a deadline of Friday. All hands are on deck. You get the project out the door, but you feel like there was a large amount of learning can be taken from this. So you can come back the following week and say, okay, let's look back at what happened last week and let's have a dialogue and conversation around this so we can take some learning. And that is the reflective piece. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael now, and he's going to take on the reflective piece. But this is just 3 different, I suppose, avenues you can take to bring the reflective piece into your workplace.
Thanks, John. And before I introduce Michael, just I suppose to go back on 1 or 2 of your points, we're always in back-to-back meetings, back-to-back conversations, back-to-back projects these days, and it's rare enough that we stop and reflect. You know, it really is. We're constantly actioning and moving forward. So I wanted to pause there just to support what you were saying, and also to introduce Michael Mulligan from Go One Better. And Michael, you're going to remind us of the power of reflection and give us some tips for that, please.
Yeah, so thanks very much, Fiona, and Owen and John also. So just to recap on, we're looking today at instilling coaching cultures and collaboration. And one of the kind of key things to start with is, what is culture? Culture comes from the Latin term cultus, which means to care for. So if you want to care for somebody or demonstrate care, listening is a great place to start. So as the lads have said, it's really around environment. Are we creating an environment in which people feel like they belong, that they bring value, that they're understood? Are they also understood that if they do feel like an imposter, that that's a normal and natural thing to feel, but do they have some place to go to be able to express that and not to be judged? So like what we're going to look at here is reflecting. Reflecting happens on 2 ways. As John said there, if a certain retrospective reflection is required, it can't happen in the moment, but it might happen next week. How we do that is really important, how we facilitate that conversation. So there's 2 parts needed. If you're a manager or leader, you need to reflect and ask yourself, when's the next best time to do this? And then secondly, when you go and do it, who's doing the reflecting? So if you're a manager or leader who's leading the reflection, you'd actually kind of it's slightly counterintuitive, because you're not facilitating other people to internally reflect and see, what did we do well? What didn't we do so well? And what will we do better next time? So WAIT is the acronym I'm introducing today. It's a mental model. It's a really simple thing to remember. WAIT, you can say the word, and what it stands for is, why am I talking? So if you're a manager or a leader and you find yourself doing a lot of talking, the question is it the best use of your time, or is it the best use of the person's time? And as Fiona was handing over, we have back-to-back meetings. And for that reason, we're often in that driving scenario all the time. We haven't come out of 5th gear. We haven't gone back into neutral. We haven't reflected to say, what's the next best course of action? And often people will ask, well, okay, so if you say I need to be doing less talking and more listening, how much? Can you give me a guide or a gauge? And so the 80-20 rule is really helpful in this sense. If you're a manager or leader and you're facilitating a one-to-one coaching conversation or a review session, listen 80% of the time and speak 20% of the time. And that gets people's voices into the room around you. And it's also implicitly training other people to respond to your approach. So if you are all the time talking, people will assume, oh yeah, so when I meet this manager, they'll tell me all the things I need to do. So internally, they're likely to disengage, as John had shown on that previous slide. Have they been given or afforded the time to speak and express themselves? So if we do provide that, and if you are the person that people go to because you listen intently, that's a great part and a great service that you're doing to both yourself and other people, because two things are happening. You're creating self-directed, autonomous people, which means that they're able to express their potential. And likewise, then they won't be returning to you for answers, because they know that what you'll provide them instead is a space to think clearly and to come up with the answer yourself. So you're also maximizing your potential. And just to invert that, if we all the time provide answers, people are going to come to us for answers, and they're not going to tap into their own resources of problem solving. So if we were to move onwards then to the common challenges that I see, there's about 3 key ones. Now there's very many more, but immediately people will say when it comes to coaching or to listening, I don't have time, it's just too much going on. And that's a very valid point to make, but I'll address that in a moment. The second is our default approach. That's how we naturally respond to scenarios. That's built over a professional experience. It's built over our education. It's built around the people that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. And it may even be from the actual approach of the organization. And the last piece here is Michael Bungay-Stainer. He's the author of Coaching Habit and the Advice Trap. And the advice trap is just this idea that we immediately respond, or maybe even react, with the idea that when somebody asks us a question, instead of being curious and holding off on advice, we listen longer. But he said the advice trap is somebody asks you a question and you feel that you need to, as manager or leader, demonstrate value and immediately respond with an advice. So if I was to look at how do we resolve these, so some coaching solutions. So 1, 2, and 3 tally up here. So the idea that I don't have enough time implies that coaching is an additional thing to do. And I totally get that, particularly if it's around the idea that it's a performance review that's happening once a quarter, or it's a monthly meeting, or it's a weekly meeting. So it's someplace in the distance. What I'm trying to get to here is it's actually around challenging our default approach. You're already doing coaching, whether you realize it or not. There are skills within the coaching approach that you have at your disposal all day, every day. So coaching is doing what you're already doing, only better. So what I mean by that is you're already having conversations. And maybe on average, even if we used to say you had 10 conversations a day, maybe that's high, maybe it's low, but let's say there's 10. Over the course of 5 days, Monday to Friday, you have 50 conversations. There's an opportunity there to have 50 better conversations. And how we're looking at it today is through the lens of listening. If you're to listen that little bit better, even in half of those, that's 25 better conversations. Even in 10%, that's 5 better conversations across the week. When you listen better and give people a chance to express themselves better, you have an opportunity to ask better questions. And if you ask better questions, you get better answers. And it gives the person the opportunity to think through their sequence of options or obstacles, as Owen was saying at the outset. And the final piece here around feedback, possibly, and maybe a conversation for another day, one of the key challenges that I'm seeing over the last 2 years is how to have good feedback conversations, both in one-to-one scenarios and in group scenarios. And what I'm seeing is people will avoid having them, which means nothing changes. So as Wayne Goldsmith, who's a coach he's done coaching at the Olympic level with the All Blacks. He said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So if we're hoping that the scenario changes without doing anything, we're unfortunately leading ourselves down the garden path. And so the advice trap then, how do we counter that? And it's to simply ask yourself, wait. If you're a manager leader, ask that to yourself, wait, why am I talking? And if you can answer in your mind to say, yes, this is a good time to talk, keep talking. But if you find that the answer to that question is, actually, this person came to me with a question. Maybe, have I understood it correctly? Have I asked enough questions? Have I listened intently enough? And if you find yourself that maybe this isn't the best time to be talking, stop and listen. Listen more intently. And as John outlined, aim to get to that level 3 where possible. But just to go and to loop it back around to number 1, coaching moments appear every day. It doesn't mean that you have to book a room and to sit down for an hour and block out your calendar. It could be a moment of listening actively for 5 minutes, and that will provide a huge amount of value. So if we're to take it to the next stage, then so this is on to the next slide. Yeah, so active listening skills. So the Dalai Lama had a very interesting quote. It said, when you talk, you're only repeating what you know, but when you listen, you learn something new. And when we're talking about learning organizations, that's learning for everyone, not for your direct report or employees. That is across the entire organization. And as John said, I'm just going to provide some listening skills that I picked 5. There's more than this, but the idea is, if you ask me, well, how do I do this, or where do I start? Well, these are very simple things that you're likely already doing, but they put a term on it just to give you an opportunity to see it more obviously in the future. So paraphrasing or restatement is when you feed back to someone what you've heard them saying. So opening a sentence with, what I'm hearing you say is you, and finish it out. You have tried approaches 1, 2, and 3. So immediately you've just fed back what you've heard. So the person is actually hearing it being said to them. And that's reflection right there, reflecting back the words. Requesting clarification, rather than the advice trap of assuming I know what you're saying. Can you tell me more about that? So we're going down a level, and to reference Michael Bungay-Stainer again, he said that more often than not, we say what we say the first thing that comes to mind. We may not have had an opportunity to talk to somebody else to clarify our thinking. And that's where you, as a manager leader, have the opportunity to coach in this manner. Summarization then is simply putting back what you're hearing in bullet point format. So let me summarize to check my understanding. You've chosen between option A and option B, or you have a decision between option A and option B. And surprisingly simple tool, but often people go, oh yeah, geez, I didn't realize that. I thought I had a gazillion things in my head. But when you bullet point it like that, it gives them a chance to see it differently. 4 and 5 are slightly different. So back to the level 2 that John mentioned, you're looking at body language. So if you have ever experienced somebody talking to you whilst typing on their laptop, you're standing beside them and they're saying, yeah, talk away, I'm listening. Immediately you're being told that what's on the person's phone or on their laptop is more important than you. And it's such a huge opportunity to give a person 2 minutes of quality time versus 5 minutes of poor quality time where you're not fully engaged or listening. So acknowledging the person with good eye contact, nodding to acknowledge your understanding and to avoid interruptions. Let them speak freely. There's also just one thing I'll tag on to that. Listening to understand and listening to agree are 2 different things. Sometimes people get the sense that if I listen to somebody, they'll think I agree with them. It doesn't necessarily be the case. It's often listening to understand it from their perspective is so important. And the final one, silence is not a sin. Possibly one of the big challenges I see when training coaches is the realization that actually I don't allow any dead time. I jump straight in if there's silence. And it turns out that it's about an internal discomfort with silence. But Nancy Klein talks about the thinking environment. The thinking environment requires silence. Allow people the chance to think clearly. And if you're looking, revert back to point 4, watch where their eyes are going. If they're not looking directly at you, if they're looking left or right, it's likely they've gone internal to figure out their own internal thoughts. So you don't need to interrupt. Let them be. And so we'll bring it to the final piece then. So these are coaching moments, and John referenced this earlier. So this is the point, is that we don't have to wait for some magic time in a month or 2 months or a quarter's time to decide I'm going to dust off the coaching skills. It's up on my shelf, I studied it, and I'll take it down for the hour and I'll put it back up again. You're encountering coaching moments all day, every day. I'm going to talk you through these options. So continue, introduce, remove, and replace. Just to start with continue, the reason I start there is in the study of positive psychology, if we're trying to improve any sense of performance, the idea is apply your strengths. So continue doing the things that are serving you well. So that first piece is about continuing to have conversations. You're having them all day, every day. So you might bring that one up there, Fiona, the first two, if that's okay. So continue having conversations. And I should reference also 1% of your day. So Go on Better is all about continuous improvement through the focus of people. 1% of your day is 15 minutes. So it's not about having longer conversations, it's about having better conversations. How do we do that? So we could introduce active listening. Today's topic is all about active listening. And the prompt, the internal mental model, or the prompt, or you could call it a reset if you're in a high performance environment. Why am I talking? That's my checkpoint. And if I catch myself talking where I don't need to be, then I just replace that with listening. And then down the bottom, often it's not about doing more, it could be doing less. So remove the listening passively, the disruptions, the focus on a phone, the typing while somebody's talking to you, and replace that with active listening. So just on that final one there, Fiona. So what we're looking to do is, rather than adding all the time, you can remove something that's not working for you and replace that. So if you remove 15 minutes of passive listening and replace it with 15 minutes of active listening, you will benefit both yourself and the person that's speaking to you. And so that kind of just brings it back around. There are a variety of different coaching skills that you are already engaging in. There is a spectrum between pure coaching, which requires, as I said, that formal approach, that sit down, that booking out of the session, and you can strip that right back all the way. So if you listen actively, you're coaching. If you ask good questions, that's a coaching skill. If you reflect, that's a coaching skill. If you're providing observational feedback, that's coaching. Collectively, then it's a coaching approach. And if we want to develop and instill coaching cultures, it's to start with a skill that you have access to all day, every day. These are in your back pocket. Management skills, leadership skills, communication skills, emotional intelligence skills. Skills go everywhere with you, and coaching skills are no different. So what I'd encourage you to do is to think about what opportunities do you have to actively listen over the coming week, even as we run into the final week of before Christmas, and just observe and notice the difference that can have. So yeah, I'll hand that back to Fiona, and thank you very much for having me along today.
Thanks indeed, Michael. So a quick reminder from Owen, we had our T-Grow model. So it gave us a whole set of questions that we could ask in relation to coaching, which, you know, is and should be an everyday and every minute affair. We see less of each other. We've more information coming at each other. We've also more skilled specializations. So it's harder to, you know, to be a manager these days, because you're possibly managing somebody technically differently qualified or even better qualified than you. But by affecting the right types of conversations and by using the tools like John mentioned, like SCARF, you know, we can spot, I suppose, that really people are coming to us in different states. And in fact, it's managers who are turning out to be more distractible than their staff, funnily enough. There's a great book Matthew Crawford wrote. I don't know if you've come across it, guys, The World Beyond Your Head. But, you know, managers in particular, they need to become, I suppose, self-coaches too. Yes, you know, the first level of learning, I think you said, John, is it internal listening? Sorry, the first level of listening even, was it internal listening? And to a certain extent, we do need to do more of that too. Managers need to listen to where their heads are at and sometimes pause before they go into meetings where, you know, they need to address individuals or groups. And finally, then for the reflective piece as well, thank you, Michael, for that one, and giving some new ways of approaching that. And, you know, your method of improving by 1%, it reminds me a lot of James Clear and Atomic Habits. And it is amazing how if you can improve by 1% on a week-to-week basis, how big the improvement is when you accumulate it at the end. So I know that there's one or two questions in, guys, so I want to kind of visit one of those if you don't mind. And the question in is, can you elaborate on how to ask better questions and give better feedback? So does anyone, Owen, will we let you go first with that? And then
Sure.
might take a tip from everyone on that. So how to ask better questions. The tip I would give is come on our critical thinking course in January, obviously. What tip would you give, Owen?
Well, thanks, Fiona. You know, the presentation that I did earlier was to link the culture to the strategy, because they say that, you know, Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And
Yes.
then, you know, we create a coaching culture which hardwires the culture into the strategy. And that allows us then, in the face of the obstacles to making the progress we really want to make, we have to have the right kind of conversations. And then we're into a state of, well, how do you ask the kind of questions to prompt the right kind of discussion, and so that you can help the person, the report, let's say, to reflect and consider how they move forward. And I suppose I'd say, in terms of a question, what you're really looking for at times is for people to become aware of things as they really are, and then become creative in how they can move forward. And so when you're asking the right questions, you're trying to prompt realism and creativity. And creativity requires three things, really. Harvey Wasserman, may he rest in peace, a former Yale professor, used to live in Galway. He said to me one day, he said, creativity, it's easy. He says, yeah, you just want to have low anxiety. He was from New York, okay. Low anxiety, high self-esteem, and open-hearted communication. And so when you're doing your questioning and you want to help people to move forward, you want to help them to be creative. And so you want to create the right environment where you reduce their anxiety, perhaps by engaging with the SCARF model, reduce their anxiety, increase their self-esteem, and allow them to communicate with you, to be generous. And so to set up that type of atmosphere. And that means that you're honest about your question. You're asking questions you don't know the answer to. You're curious. They've got purpose. It's in the context of the obstacle that you're trying to overcome, and that you're brave, that you're willing to have the right kind of conversations with people. And so you connect with them on that level, are honest and true. And I suppose that's what I'd say in terms of, maybe how you could ask better questions. Yeah.
John, have you a suggestion for us as well?
Yeah, as with most of these, it depends. But I think there's this temptation to come up with really clever questions, but simplicity is key with these. And I think it's the timing and the relevance that are more important than whether the question sounds really intelligent or not. Usually for me, I'll bring it back to, what am I actually trying to achieve with the question, which will feed into what you're trying to achieve in the coaching conversation. And that may be, okay, this is a conversation around helping them to learn a specific skill. So I'm going to use questions then that's going to steer them more towards the learning. And that will come back to what the guys did. I should be talking less because we're trying to get them to figure this out and learn. And one of the questions I get people to use a lot is, when people come to you with a problem, I'll say, tell me what you've tried so far. Which usually leads to that. Silence. They've tried nothing. They just come to you because you always fix it and it makes you feel good because I've got the answers and I'm so smart. But if you're
John,
trying to create
do we have to strike a balance? Do we need to strike a balance too, though? Because on the other hand, then we often say to people, don't come to me with your problems, come to me with your solutions, which is almost like saying to them, don't come unless you haven't worked out already.
No, I would fully agree. And I think there's where coaching gets overused and misconstrued in the workplace is that they think that the solution to everything is just ask more questions, and it's not. Sometimes people come and they genuinely don't know. They haven't a clue. They're coming to you because you know, or you can help them or steer them. But if you get a sense that this person never switches their brain on, I'm literally the information desk for them, and I need them to take a little bit more autonomy or learn a little bit more. Now I'm going to start pushing back and saying, okay, tell me what you've tried. How far have you taken this before you came to me? And it might be, oh, I'm sorry, John, I haven't tried anything. Okay, off you go. Take it as far as you can, then come back to me. So the context and what you're trying to achieve will dictate the quality of the questions and what the focus should be. Sometimes it's around awareness. So it could be somebody's behaviors within a meeting. And you could be just trying to shine a light so that they become aware of the impact they're having in that environment. Are they triggering reward states, or are they triggering threat states in you or other people? So that's the lens which the question is going through. Or is it a piece just to get them to think? Okay, what else could we do here? what other options could we try? So I think the questions, they don't need to necessarily be overly complex or sophisticated. I think if they're pointed at what you're trying to achieve, then that helps a lot. And look, we've loads of questions we can send on. If you want some examples, we're happy to do so. But I think it's important to, the context and the timing is as important as the cleverness.
I have a different question for you, Michael, if you don't mind. But
Yeah.
one of the things Margaret and I discussed on our webinar last Monday was that, you know, in remote teams, it's harder to read body language. So it's harder to read between the lines and that engage in that global listening that you spoke about, because there is no environment socially except that you're on it for the hour for that meeting, whether you should be there or at that meeting or otherwise, which is another question. But Margaret and I were saying one of the things that happens is nobody speaks up who disagrees. There's less dissent because it's harder to disagree in a remote meeting. So people kind of maybe don't say much. And then it's only later that you realize, okay, there wasn't the buy-in I thought there was. So, you know, could it be as simple as saying in a meeting, okay, guys, what could you tell me that I don't want to hear today? Is that too simple a question? Or Michael, what do you think? Well, like how could a manager invite in the quieter voices, or the voices actually that are more doubtful, rather than, you know, just the one or two voices that will tend to be heard anyway, because they're more maybe engaged or, you know, more, I suppose, confident in that setting.
Yeah.
How can you invite in the quieter people to ask questions?
So it kind of ties back into Gillian Place's second part of the question around giving better feedback. It's what you normalize, and it's about how do you get there over time. So if you create an environment in which it's normal to have conversations that are looking at what we did well and what we didn't do well and what we need to do better, that's an example that becomes part and parcel of how we do things around here. If it becomes something that we only ever talk about what we want to, what we've done well, or we ignore what we do badly, there's an implicit message in that. It's like John had just mentioned, if we all the time answer questions, we're the implied information desk. So people are used to that behavior and they'll continue to come to us. So it's around normalization of better conversations, more robust conversations, better feedback. But I would be inclined to say start with the better questions through being present, actively listening, asking the simple and right question from a curious outlook. So as Owen said at the outset, you know, ask it from the pure sense of curiosity. If you know the answer to the question, you're only setting some, as they say, you're leading the witness. And then over time, once the trust is built, that's when you can have the more rigorous parts of better feedback in a one-to-one and better review sessions as a group or a team.
So in a way, it's very contextual around the relationships and around what's normal in our team meetings in the first place, or in how we interact. So it's all about the culture of conversations, isn't it really?
Yes, and being intentional about how we create that. So if it's not working, if the buy-in isn't there, well, that's our starting point. How do we begin to get the buy-in so that we go from that point?
Sadly, we've only 2 minutes left, but and I'm just remembering another conversation point we had, Margaret, last week, which was around the different generations, right? And what I noticed with maybe the young early stage careers now is they have spent much more time communicating with people not in real time, if you know what I mean, or at least not in the same room as them. So they could be communicating very effectively with people, but they're not necessarily in the same room as them, and they're not necessarily making eye contact. So has that eye contact bit changed too? Because if you're eyeballing someone now who's an early stage career, that mightn't be the most comfortable for them. Is there another way of reading people's response, you know, and responsiveness rather than that eye to eye contact? Have you any tips there?
That's directed to Margaret or to
anyone at all, guys, whoever wants to pick that up. I notice my teenager doesn't even talk to his friends on the phone in real time as much as he does. They leave voice memos for each other.
I suppose the one thing I would say though about that, sorry, gentlemen, in terms of my own experience, is that I still think the face-to-face in terms of attitudinal or behavioural change or whatever, just, you know, there is nothing as powerful. I think it's actually made it more powerful, Fiona.
Yeah.
The fact
so
that
pick what you want to do maybe in those face-to-face moments very selectively. Would that be it?
Yeah.
I'm just going to move on to just last 1 or 2 slides, guys, just to remind everyone of your mantras. So starting with Owen, it was say less, ask more. So thanks, Gillian, for your question there. And there's a good neuroscience behind that, because we have really 3 brains that we're managing at any given time. And a lot of the time we are in a very automatic, reflexive mode of thinking fast, as John said. We don't slow down enough, but as John was reminding us, you know, do slow down and have enough pauses so that you can be more effective, basically, especially in the conversation. And again, don't be afraid. Silence isn't sinful. There's nothing wrong with pauses in a conversation and taking a minute to think and allowing the other person to think. And as Michael reminded us, you know, you'll be able to tell based on their eye movement sometimes, you know, that they are internally reviewing and need that moment to themselves, even, you know, in a conversation, a 2-way conversation. And we're teaching machines how to read facial expressions, but let's hope we don't learn how to read each other's in all the camera off meetings that we spend our time in. So thanks, Owen from ARV. Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael from Go Better. Thanks, Margaret, too, for coming back in this week. I really love having you back. 2 interesting talks maybe for you, 2 free webinars coming up, one in February, one in March. The February one, we'll talk a lot more about talent retention and a lot more about cognition for the purpose of talent retention, because we're in a lot of cognitive dissonance at the moment. Even things like agile, we're giving mixed signals about agile, I think, as a project management tool, etc., and as a culture. The multicultural teamwork might be an interesting one for you. It uses what's called the Cantor 4-player systems model to invite in the quieter voices on multicultural teams. And then our critical thinking one, always great to teach your teams to ask better questions using the Socratic method. That can be booked for January. It's all online, 2 workshops in the mornings. And then finally, we have a lovely team resilience program that we're just launching this year to support teams better to deal with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So that all remains really is to say thank you so much, guys. It's great to have all of you involved, and those of you who tuned in, have a wonderful Christmas. Thanks for all your support to the Engineering Skillnet throughout the year. And, you know, pick up a phone anytime and talk to us. Let us know how you're going on with your teams. I would encourage Michael, just before we finish, John and Owen, to put their email addresses up in the chat as well, so that people can go back and access those email addresses if they need to. And we will have a get together for all our training providers next year. We'll have a guest speaker from the University of Washington, Dr. Kieran O'Mahony. He is a professor of neuroeducation. He was the ex-head of learning both for Boeing and for Nike in the past. An Irishman. He plays the uilleann pipes, may or may not play the uilleann pipes at the session, but either way, would love to have you all back then. So looking forward to seeing you all in the new year, and have a lovely break, guys. So I'll stop recording now. But feel free to make any comments, guys.
Thank you, Fiona.
Hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Not at all.